There was a story going around in my youth, and I've never verified it, that there was some activist, a person well-intentioned, and he thought that the solution to bring the solution to all the problems in America is to bring all the great Orthodox Jewish leaders from Lakewood and Rabbi Soloveitchik and his modern Orthodox stream and the Chassidish Rebbe's and the Rebbe and the Satmar Rebbe, to bring them all together in the room for a meeting. So they say that when this person came to Rabbi Soloveitchik about his idea of bringing all of them, to one room for a meeting, Rabbi Soloveitchik smiled and said, "Are you trying to bring on World War III?" And when the idea was brought to the Rebbe smiled and said, "Are you trying to usher in Yemei HaMashiach?" 3 years ago, thank you, Rabbi Gordon, by the way, you really transported us to a beautiful place, and with practical achlotis, I'm going to talk a little bit about the present, based on the Sikha after the famous Sikha in Purim Tavshim Mem Zayin. I'll get to that in a second. 3 years ago, Gimel Tammuz was on Shabbos, the 25th Gimel Tammuz. That was my role and my responsibility to be in my Chabad house for Shabbos, to lead, facilitate a Fabrengen for Gimel Tammuz. So Thursday morning, I went to travel to New York. I was by the rail all day. And at night, I came to 770. My flight had to leave to the airport 4:30 in the morning on Friday. So Baruch Hashem, at 2 o'clock in the morning, finally a Fabrengen formed in 770 with Rabbi Shalom Ber Levittin from Seattle. And we were sitting a group of guys the night before the 25th Gimel Tammuz, and there was a feeling of gaguyim, a feeling of frustration. 25 years at Dain Lein Neshanu. And Rabbi Levittin picked up on something. He said, I understand all these feelings. They're very appropriate. But I'm getting the feeling as you're all sitting here and you throw up your hands and it as if you're helpless bystanders. And then for 2 hours, I take a pump it in the neshama. Do you believe what the Rambam says? And more importantly, what the Rebbe says needs to be in front of us 24 hours a day today, that your next act or your next words or your next thought can bring Yeshua Vatzal Chaleim, literally. So it's fine to have these gaguyim, but it's in your hands. We can bring the Rebbe back and we can bring Mashiach. So that Fabrengen left a very strong impression on me, and so therefore I'm going to share a little bit from the Fabrengen of Purim Tavshim Mem Zayin. That Fabrengen in Purim Tavshim Mem Zayin really had very similar language to Chav Ches Nissen Tavshim Nun Aleph. In a way, you can say it was the beginning of the Rebbe passing on or making us aware in very clear terms that it's our responsibility, it's our role. We're going to be the ones to bring Mashiach. And obviously, Chav Ches Nissen had its own very unique intensity. And since a lot of people have already spoken about the Fabrengen of Purim Tavshim Mem Zayin, and by the way, somebody sent me a link that on Friday to the Hebrew COL, that on Thursday night there was a sifa of the Bachim Tamimim in Eretz Yisrael, and they had some videos, the highlight of this, which are on the web, beautifully discussing and treating the Sikha of Purim Tavshim Mem Zayin and the background and the impact it had and the similarities to Chav Ches Nissen. So I'll just point out, and you can go online over there, you'll see it really, really transports you to that Sikha and brings out this idea of the Rebbe giving over to us to bring Mashiach. So I'm just going to bring a couple of nekudas that the Rebbe said that night. One akdama, I was on last night for a little bit, and everybody's been really, really inspiring and coming from different perspectives, very often with achlotas to take home. One of the things that were mentioned last night a lot is the idea that the Rebbe made us Chav Ches Nissen, Purim Mem Zayin, and many other times, that it's in our hands, that we are the influencers. We should know very clearly that we, every single one of us, anashim, vetaf, are the influencers. So Stam, this whole subject of influencers, the only two cameras I see on are people who don't live in America. So I don't know if it's in the whole world this way, but in America, there's a fascination with the idea of influencers. And ich nicht zu viel verstanden them, aber ich habe meine Kinder, who are a little bit more behavent in the sugya of influencers, and they were masbid to me. They explained to me that there's been a radical change in who has influence. It used to be people that have money. People that have money still have a lot of influence, but l'mashal celebrities, actors, sports stars, they were considered the influencers, the greatest influencers in society. And today, even if celebrity has 1 million followers on Twitter or they have on Instagram, they're only they're half influencers. The greatest influencers are the ones, people we don't know their names, individuals, young people sitting by a computer and pressing a few buttons, taking a video from here and putting it in this important place at the time, or writing short posts and having the ability to affect change on societies, on countries. The greatest influencers are people we don't know, young people that are sitting pressing buttons. So interesting, on Yud Shvat Tavshin Mem Vav, the Rebbe spoke about the halacha in the Rambam, that you should always look at the whole world balanced between merit and the opposite of merit, and your own situation balanced between schus and the opposite of schus. And your next act, and the Rebbe always added, and your next word that you're going to say, and your next thought can bring salvation and redemption to the world. So the Rebbe said it's a very radical idea that our one small thought or act will bring Geulah to the whole world. It doesn't seem something that can resonate with us. So the Rebbe said in the last generations, once we had the splitting in the atom and nuclear weapons and so on, the Rebbe said we're afraid, people are afraid, and today that's something that everybody's talking about, that one bad person can press a button and chas v'shalom destroy a city or a medina. And the Emes says it doesn't have to be that bad person. If that device came to a child, all the child would have to do is press that button because of everything that it's wired into, and they can make a churban in the whole world. And we know, of course, no question that the power of positive is stronger than the power of negative. So now we could picture that our next act, even a Maisa Katan, it can be a small act, pressing a button, can influence and change the whole world. And that's what we're seeing today. The people who are influencing, changing the world, setting the whole agenda are people that are sitting and doing a few clicks. And I was pointing out last night, the idea of the sikhs is that we are the influencers, each and every one of us, to bring Mashiach. That Fabrengen, the Rebbe began that Fabrengen saying that the subject matters, the nashim by the Fabrengens have changed over the years. In the early years of Deir Shvi, not the Rebbe's words, but my words, and in the Fabrengens of Rabbi Yossi Nemes before, and in general, by Geulah Yisrael, from time to time, they would mention Geulah and Mashiach, mention it as an important thing, foundation of our faith. But the idea that by every Fabrengen, that's what was spoken about, and as a central foundational idea, that was not until recently, including this halacha from Hilchos Shuvah, chapter 3. It's a Gemara in Kedushin, it's halacha in the Rambam, and nevertheless, only from time to time it was mentioned, and as one of the many things that were mentioned. But lately, we mention it as something that has to be front and center in front of us as right now to know this in. And it's because, of course, that Mashiach is closer. It's ikvus in the Mashiach. We're on the doorstep of Mashiach. This is the time we're in. This is the call of the hour, that the ideas of Mashiach and Geulah should be front and center, and the emphasis and the foundation, and including this halacha, and especially this halacha that we for ourselves should constantly have in our consciousness, that our next act or speech or word or thought can be the tipping point to bring the world to Geulah. And also we should be, every time there's a gathering, we should say, Yidden, listen, Yidden, listen, your next act, each individual, the Rebbe pointed out, und he and she, each and every individual man and woman, and then he pointed out a child, because the Rambam says, Maisa, action, and a child, his machshav is not significant in halacha, but his action is. He can press that button. Because now it's important. And by the way, this shtickle chiddush, it's one thing you say general about things of Mashiach and Geulah. There's different things that are emphasized. By the way, with Beizir coming up, until the Rebbe's Nesias, you don't hear the story of L'chatchila Rebbe except one time in the Friedrich Rebbe's letter. As a matter of fact, the Rebbe wrote a sefer HaTeilus of the Rebbe Marash, in America. The rechava of the Friedrich Rebbe, the story of the Rebbe, the word of the Rebbe is not mentioned. Came Deir Shvi, it's in every sikh and every fabringen, the Ramarash's Nigin is named Rebbe and so on. And the same thing with Inyani Mashiach Geulah, now is the time. But this is a big chiddush, this is a halacha, the Rebbe would always be medayik, precise where the halacha is. It's not a halacha at the end of Hilchos Malachim. It's not a halacha at the end of Hilchos Tshuva that talks about the days of Mashiach. It's halacha in the part of Hilchos Tshuva that's talking about how we have to perceive ourselves every day and how we have to be inspired every day, and especially during a sense to make tshuva. And nevertheless, until 1987, it wasn't emphasized constantly, and now it's constantly has to be on our focus. The Rebbe continued the Fabrengen, talking about Sheva Mitzvahs and the tremendous change that there has been. That we know that we weren't involved in Sheva Mitzvahs because it was too dangerous. And today, the non-Jew gives you a yashakeach, helps you if you share with him Sheva Mitzvahs. But despite all these changes that the world has come along, that the world is a more refined place, Mashiach hasn't come. And despite all the kitzin throughout all the generations, and even we should notice that the Rebbe Rashab gave a kitzin. This is Purim Tavshim Zayin. The Rebbe continued in Tafresh Samach Vav was a ketz. And then the Avuy in the Kul of us is that the Friedrich Rebbe in Tafshin Gimel and Tafshin Dalid directed that we should announce and proclaim and print, and something that's print is for generations, that la'al til tshuva, la'al til geulah, and he did this at tremendous cost and sacrifice. There's very unusual language about that, and nevertheless he insisted that we should it should be announced, it should be publicized, la'al til tshuva, la'al til geulah. And nevertheless, decades have passed. Mashiach is not here. And I've been searching and searching for some explanation as to what's going on and what can be done. Till I realized, possible, the only explanation is that being that a nasi akel, the nasi is everyone in the generation. The idea is that the bring of Mashiach has to be passed on from the nasi to each and every person in the generation. Each man and each woman and each child as individuals, not just as a klal, the hakel. Each individual in the hakel. And each and every one of us has to be involved. And as I mentioned, that it's dependent on us. And now that each individual, the hakel, in other words, till now, the hakel was hoping to bring Mashiach through the nasi. And now the nasi wants to bring Mashiach through. Is the way Mashiach is going to be brought is dafke through the hakel, through each and every person. There's very clear language over there, very similar to Chav Ches Nissen. And he says, and therefore now that it's up to each and every one, every man and woman and child that has to bring Mashiach. So you have to know that your next act is not just a general inspiration. It means each and every one of you. It means in your next act and your next speech and your next thought. In the next sikha, and this sikha is already much talked about, including in this very Fabrengen. By the way, coming up in the second video, coming up in the video in another few minutes, will be a continuation. Anyway, in the second sikha, the Rebbe talks about that Daniel says that Yizbaru v'Yislabnu v'Yitztar Rabim, that before Mashiach comes, things will come to fore, both for good and the opposite of good that were previously hidden or latent. And the good comes to the fore because it's a sign of Mashiach. And the negative is also a sign of Mashiach because it gives us the ability to be able to fix. Well, as long as something is latent or hidden, you don't know about it. When it comes to the fore, even if it's negative, it's a blessing because you can correct it. And the Rebbe gives two examples, letav, and two examples, lemutav. In the negative, the Rebbe says there's wars going on that we weren't mashayir, that these wars could be happening. And the reason why we're not totally focused on it because they're far off lands. We all understand today, we're talking about two Western countries very much in everyone's consciousness with very large Jewish communities. Some of the crown jewels of Lubavitch and Chassidus and Chabad and Shluchis is in Ukraine and Russia. And the Eibishter Tzedaka bench the Shluchim and the Yidden and the general countries in not only Ukraine, but the Shluchim in Russia also for a big bracha in this situation. Amen. The second thing that Rebbe mentioned, Lemutav, is about Machlekes. Tavshem Mem Zayin, not something we want to elaborate. It was a year of Lav Dafke Shalom. And the Rebbe said, people you wouldn't think are controversial are suddenly involved in Machlekes. So it's an opportunity to correct this. So Baruch Hashem, in Lubavitch, we know now that especially the last few years, the last 20 years, and especially Lacharena, and especially with the initiative after Chaver Benny Wolf passed away, his second yahrzeit coming up, that there's a tremendous achdus between shluchim in each place and shluchim in adjacent places, and anash in each community, and shluchim and anash, and whatever vestige, and a lot of nachas ruach the Rebbe has, the matzav is mamish, in my opinion. I'm not the Barditcheva by nature. The matzav is Baruch Hashem and nachas ruach, and whatever vestige there is will certainly be corrected. And then the Rebbe comes to the two positive things that have recently come to light. One is the Rebbe says about tzedaka with a very interesting expression that the Yidden have a tradition of giving tzedaka. We're a very charitable people. It's the mitzvah. And especially in America is a very strong tradition of philanthropy. Afal Pikein, no one was able to foresee the type of tzedaka, the giving, the absolute giving with an open hand that we're seeing lately in tzedaka. What's our situation today? The Indian of tzedaka is unbelievably prevalent in the Jewish world, in the frum world, and in the anash world, where the Rebbe has brought us. This whole idea of these charity campaigns, I know some of them are, the text and reminders are getting a little bit of the kirchena b'salamo, but the fact is that if you look at these campaigns, in addition to the big givers, it's half of it is anash. It's almost like the in the Gersa Kedesh, the Rebbe talks about hakel lefireva maisa, to give often. It should be, as the Rebbe would say, a yada mechaleket tzedaka, a hand that's constantly giving. Our computer, with the click of a button that has already our information. Every day we're giving $36, $72, $100, $54. Pasha, the computer a mechaleket tzedaka with one maisa echad. It's a tremendous nachas ruach. A shliach told me, who's a shliach in a place that's very popular now for people to move to, Alderich, Florida. And all kinds of people are moving there. And a lot of young anash of all kinds. And he tells me you can tell all the Jewish people are into tzedaka, but you can tell who a Lubavitcher is just by the tzedaka. And lav dafke, the ones who are running around with Olkutasichis or running a mifzayim, even the Lubavitchers that might not be their thing or are working on it still. He says that what the Rebbe engraved in us of helping other people and giving tzedaka biyad rechava, he sees it in an unbelievable manner. The tzedaka of these young business people in Lubavitch is just unprecedented. That was one thing that Rebbe mentioned. The second thing that Rebbe mentioned that day I want to mention, by the way, talk about living in the times of Mashiach. There's an initiative among shluchim, and it's a lot of shluchim. And it's not something that's sparsome. Obviously, it's a pnimi among shluchim, that new donations that they receive, that we didn't receive in past years, or a major increase that you weren't expecting. Or somebody comes to you Chabad for Shul and he does Chabad for Shabbos and he doesn't leave $180. He leaves $1,500. That happened to me a month ago. So it's like a dover that's a pella. So and if you have other sources of income, when new or unexpected income comes in, that we share 10% with other shluchim. And thousands of dollars are being shared every week. And it's a Mashiach's way of living without any fanfare, it's a davar pashut. If the donation wasn't designated for a certain thing, that Kamuvin is one thing, but somebody gave it to us to do as we understand what's important for our meiset, that all meisters should be healthy as well as important. And if you get a new donation, you share 10%. And this is what the Rebbe achieved with tzedaka and sharing and giving. The last thing that the Rebbe said that they l'tev is that in Limud HaTorah, there's a new way, chidushim and insights that are unprecedented. It's a be'en hareich of the way of learning Torah until now. And some people are makashet plainly, the Rebbe said. But we have it, the Isbar of Islam, what's come to the fore is, for example, the teachings of the Ragachover. And the Rebbe goes on to speak to the Ragachover for a few minutes. That his unique style, and the Rebbe says, it's nothing to discuss. Nobody can really have a discussion with you. The Rebbe says, when it comes to the way the Ragachover ate or drank or slept or spaziert, so he was very medactic, everything was according to halacha, but you don't see something that totally distinguishes him in a different league. But when it comes to his approach to Torah study and Chidushim Torah study, it's in a different world. And we were zeichet it now, before Mashiach comes, it's come to the forefront. It's very hard to understand. I mean, the Ragachava passed away in Tafresh Sadik Vav in 1936, 7 years before La'altul Tshuva La'altul Geulah. The Rebbe is trying to convince us now that 30 years after the Frierdiker Rebbe's proclamation La'altul Tshuva La'altul Geulah, now we're really before the Geulah. What's missing is just that each and every one of us should realize it's our inheritance, that our next thought, our next speech and action. And the Rebbe is talking about the Ragachava's Chidushim, which is for the previous generations. I'm going to give a quick speculation, but before that, I want to point out something that's very interesting. The Igris Kadesh, for those who are young, you should know that until Purim Tavshin Mem Zayin, we did not have something called the Igris Kadesh. We had the Sichas, Mamorim. The Rebbe's letters were printed in the back of the Sichas as a suffix. 2 days after the Rebbe said, there's now a phase of emphasis that it's being passed on from the Nasi to Kolodar. And every person has to know that their next act is significant. Their next thing that they say or think. The Rebbe received a packet from Vad Lefatzasichas of letters from Maskirus, from Rabbi Simpson, to ask if they can give the copies of Maskirus to the Tilkut Sichas and they can print it. And the Rebbe instead passed it on to Rabbi 11. Purim Farbrengen Mem Zayin was Sunday night. This was Tuesday. Passed it on to Ber 11 and said that he basically came out that he wants a separate series called Igris Kadesh, that the letters and everything we have from Igris Kadesh, with the people who read 2-3 Igris every day, and we just had 30 Igris in 30 days, and all the Chalukas, and the Igris Kadesh is the waters from this which we all live in many different ways. That started Mamish Purim Tavshim Mem Zayin in that era when the beginning of Chav Ches Nisa started, because now we need Kol HaTshuvas to Kol HaShailas, as the Alter Rebbe says. So just about the Ragachava, I mean, maybe the Rebbe is obviously, it's kind of obvious the Rebbe is talking about himself as the continuance of the Ragachava's ways. I only have 2 minutes left. So very briefly, when the Igris Kadesh were being printed, and that was happening at that time, the first letter in Igris Kadesh is a letter from the Rebbe to Ragachava at age 25. When the Rebbe writes to Ragachava, I received your letter in response to my letter. Later on in the Miluyim in volume 21, there's a letter when the Rebbe was 22 from Yekaterinslav, on the Mityagarari's name, where the Rebbe writes to Ragachava also, I received your letter in response to your letter, that it's come to the fore now with the Igris being printed, that the whole world could know that there's plainly that the Rebbe is the Mamshech Darkei of the Ragachava, with a way of learning and deciphering Torah and Chidushim in a way that's unprecedented preparation for Mashiach. The 1 minute left for Achlotis. I want to say that like 10 years ago, I made a resolution to learn in Yoni Mashiach Geulah. I used Rabbi Galitsky's Yemeis HaMashiach Ba'alacha, first the first volume, then the second volume a few years later. And really, it's an encyclopedia about Yoni Mashiach, very easy to read. I used to give over almost every day between Mincha and Ma'ariv a vart from there. And then, of course, you have these things that Tut Alts did. Definitely learned these sikhs the way I'm very helped by these sikhs that are with all the aids and that help you learn the sikhs. And the last thing is a big aseirus, the one mitzvah. So one of the things we did here, in addition to the shluchim for May of Esem Shana, making a chlota to reach out to people that come from time to time to Chabad to get them to do a mitzvah, we're having the people in our Chabad combined collectively to get 120 people that they're going to influence in Torah mitzvahs. And when I spoke about it, we're starting to implement it now. But when I spoke about it, Shabbos before Yudalef Nissen, just speaking about it, a man stood up and said, I'm buying mezuzahs for my brother's house. Or he came over to me after davening. And then when I mentioned that my brother in Florida put a pair of tefillin in his store with a sign that whoever wants to put in his business, whoever wants to put on tefillin, Hebrew and English, put on tefillin, somebody actually got up. That was actually got up on the second day of Pesach. I mentioned the story, and he said he's going to sponsor a pair of tefillin for the local store if the person agrees to have the tefillin with a sign up that anyone can put on tefillin in the store with a tefillin b'shor and other b'shors. And that tefillin has been ordered. The store has agreed, and we can all bring millions and millions of new mitzvahs and bring Mashiach now. Thank you again to the organizers. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'vracha.